Good old NATO mug. End of a good cup of Yorkshire tea. Hello, team. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine news update. The first part thereof for the, 1st of December. Pinching a punch for the first of the month. No returns. You can't hit me back. And I said, you can't hit me back. Stop hitting me. Sorry, just went back to playground rules. Not a night of a huge amount of activity from either side with regard to missile and drone attacks, although we just hear that Dnipro has been hit by a ballistic missile. So unfortunately, there are casualties and deaths there. We're going to be talking a bit about partisan activity, car bombs and railway attacks and bombs behind lines with special forces or partisans, not quite sure sometimes who is doing the activity. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some recruitment issues for the Russians and communication issues between Russian units and whatnot. But slightly less has happened overnight than on other nights during the last week or so. There have been some incredibly nuts nights, but it's a little bit quieter. Anyway, if you haven't already, please remember to subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much to those who have already done so. Really, really appreciated. Right, let's get into the long weeds of it all. Okay, so we have the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before, all the usual caveats apply, of course, and you can find those caveats listed or linked in the description below. There have been 1,060 personnel lost over the last 24 hours, so that's over 1,000. Good news for the Ukrainians. One single tank, 6 armored combat vehicles, 14 artillery systems. So that is less than we have seen. In fact, fairly low-ish numbers across the categories there. 6 armored combat vehicles is actually more than sometimes. 71 vehicles and fuel tanks, fairly decent there, but not at the 100 threshold we have been used to previously. So those are the stats over the last 24 hours. We're going to look at a couple of threads. First one is going to be the unsustainable cost of Russian regional recruitment model. This has come from Turchny, a new article from Turchny's Judith Everett there. As regional budgets feel the strain, with many having posted significant deficits, the very system the Russian war machine runs on appears to be under threat. Russia's recruitment model relies on regional poverty and financial coercion. Life-changing sums maintain the flow of men into the military. If regional budgets cannot support recruitment, Moscow's ability to pay men to kill and commit war crimes will be greatly reduced. Russia's centralized decision-making hides a crucial truth. Its recruitment model relies on impoverished regions where, along with ideological motivation to kill Ukrainians, economic hardship drives enlistment. Russian military pay isn't life-changing. The real draw is the bonuses, about $5,147 from Moscow plus millions from regions for economically unproductive Russians with no prospects. That's hard to turn down. Unlike its earlier wars, Russia now fights with contract soldiers who signed up voluntarily. They're signing up for cash to invade a neighbor and commit war crimes. The model rests on decades of inequality and poverty. Before the war, 3.5 million Russians were unemployed and 17.8 million lived below the poverty line. A 1.4 million rubles sign-up bonus is life-changing. Poverty, especially in the regions, has been a key factor in keeping Russia's army supplied for nearly 4 years. I think there's a statement earlier that said isn't life-changing. I think they meant to say it is life-changing. So regional bonuses of up to 3 million rubles make volunteering irresistible. Regional budgets are now straining under this recruitment model. Despite being in the black in 2024, deficits in 2025 have reached 724.8 billion rubles, a huge burden for provinces funding an illegal war. Crucially, bonuses are currently being slashed. Bashkortostan, 1.6 million rubles to 1 million rubles. Yamalo Nenets, 3.1 to 1.9 million rubles. Samara, 3.6 to 2.1 million. Belgorod, 3 million to 0.8 million. Some regions have suspended payments. Others look set to follow. The recruitment machine is under threat and could break down. The Kremlin's choices are all destructive. Seize more oligarch wealth, mobilize unwilling men, return to hybrid war, or accept peace and give up their earlier war goals. Cracks will first show in the regions. Falling payouts and squeezed budgets put Russia's recruitment model in peril. Russia's recruitment challenges won't start in Moscow, but in the provinces that can't afford to meet recruitment targets. Judas Everett is a researcher on the history and contemporary issues of Central Eastern Europe. He lives in Odessa. You can read his first article for Tochny in the link provided there, and that will be linked in my usual way in the sources section below. So the unsustainable cost of Russia's regional recruitment model. That is good news for Ukraine. The question is, how long does that take to have an effect on the front line if there is no change to the squeezing of these budgets? If indeed they're going to fail to recruit, going forward, how does that affect, when will that affect the front lines positively for Ukraine? What's the kind of lead time there? Okay, we have another thread. This is a Chriso Wiki thread talking about the relationship between neighboring Russian units. And this is something we've heard previously during the war. And in fact, this is an issue for both sides, to be honest. But at least with the Ukrainian side, they have the Delta system that allows there to be live communication and whatnot across the front lines. I think that's a really significant advantage for the Ukrainians, but nonetheless, it can be often the case that one unit here doesn't know what the next unit is doing, and it is in the fog of war. You can imagine that there would be a difficulty to communicate when people are running around shooting among different streets and whatnot in a heavily destructive scenario, right? Relationships between neighboring Russian units in the Pokrovsk area, says Chris Owicki, are reportedly so tense that commanders have no public instructions on how to behave, including refraining from stealing from each other. So this then goes from the kind of communication issues when you are doing, say, an attack or defending a rural or urban area or whatever, but actually the relationships just more broadly between units, where certain units are resentful of other units, or there's no love lost between them, and they're not behaving well to each other. A lack of training and incompetent command is blamed. Call sign Osetin explains the context. Quote, comrades in Pokrovsk, I'm addressing you. Information is coming in from various units that there's discord between some units. No one wants to cooperate and no one likes their neighbors, blaming each other for everything. If this is true, I ask all soldiers, including brigade commanders, to resolve this issue and forget all grievances. We have one enemy, and squabbling among ourselves is absolutely unacceptable, especially when several cities containing US forces are about to fall. And that's what they say, US forces, but it might mean Ukrainian. Cooperation, mutual understanding, and respect between neighboring units are the key to success and our victory. Thank you. Sviatoslav Golikov publishes the instructions on his Philologists in Ambush Telegram channel. His comments that the problems are the product of a lack of normal, adequate training and competent command staff on the ground. Quote, the Pokrovsk direction has requested that the following urgent recommendations be published for related units. I'm omitting the unit numbers. It's highly recommended that you identify yourself and take steps to rectify the situation. However, publishing the guideline will be helpful overall, as these occurrences are not uncommon. So I quote, 1, arrive at your positions, get to know your neighbors, you're not alone. 2, buy yourself some shotguns, they'll help you fight drones. 3, camouflage, no need to walk around at night with a searchlight and make fires, and also hide your equipment. 4, if an effing motorcycle is just sitting there, don't touch it, it's not yours. 5, asking operators from other units to work for you, and then, to put it mildly, insulting them is not necessary. They have enough of their own problems without you. 6, I understand that everyone is scared, adrenaline rush and so on, but there's no reason to shoot at everything that moves and makes any sound. 7, don't deploy Starlinks in the open. 8, if you're given a combat mission and you say there are drones there and we're not going there, that's no effing reason not to carry out the mission. And while you're hesitating and being talked to, others are doing it. Keep a broader perspective, because you're just one tool in a larger mission and you're not the only one involved. 9, train your personnel. Every mistake brings with it a chain of negative consequences, not only for the idiot who knows nothing, but also for those who do their job perfectly. As long as a soldier has nothing in his head, don't expect anything good and think that everything will pass him by. Luck favors are prepared. Glory to Russia. Call sign Valet. Okay, so issues between units there, to the point where they're having to bring out a list of guidelines on how to behave with each other. Now, talking about fighting on the front line, I did a frontline update this morning. It was a real rushed job, 3-week update, so much change on the front line. It was hard to really focus too much on any one area. It's a very overall look at the mapping, but it does show you that the Russians are moving in a number of places quite consistently. So sometimes the longer updates are interesting to see how much the mapping is changing. But it looks like the Ukrainians are really fighting in the streets in Myrnograd. They are functionally surrounded, but the supply lines are somewhat open. At least they are a grey zone. So it's difficult, and one is assuming that the Ukrainians are going to be doing some kind of operational withdrawal from Myrnograd, which is just to the east of Pokrovsk. That's that pocket that the Ukrainians have been fighting hard to keep open. Ukrainian forces are engaged in street fighting with Russian troops in the southern part of Myrnograd, as according to this video that you are seeing. And right, then we're going to get on to a number of different claims to partisan activity that I'm never quite sure whether it's like special forces. This does appear to be partisan activity in Berdyansk for the second time in 2 days. So yesterday I released I didn't release it. I referenced a video that showed Kadyrovites doing some deal over fuel, and there were 2 fuel trucks there, and there was an explosion behind it, and then it cut to there only being 1 vehicle there later, and then another explosion. And this is being filmed from sort of across the road and down the verge. So this was being looked at by the person who no doubt was either spotting for the strikes, or if it was some kind of missile strike, or was the person who placed the explosives there if it was some kind of bomb going off. And here we have Berdyansk again, and we've got 9 invaders, an enemy Tiger, so that's like an infantry mobility vehicle, and 2 pickup trucks. As a result of explosions in Berdyansk, the Russians suffered losses, according to the Ukrainian military intelligence. On November the 19th, so this is going back sort of almost 2 weeks, the Russian invaders gathered under a propaganda billboard. Their leisurely conversation was interrupted by a powerful explosion. Losses were 5 invaders from the Rodzgvardia, so these are like your riot police, sort of internal security services, were destroyed. 4 more were heavily injured, so that's 9 casualties, 5 dead, 4 heavily injured. 2 enemy pickups and an armored car, the Tiger, the infantry mobility car, were damaged. So that's a really successful strike there, or a bit of partisan activity, exactly what you want to see an awful lot of happening behind, deep into Russian territory behind the lines. And then we have this video from the Special Operations Forces. They've released footage showing sabotage operations targeting Russian relay cabinets and locomotives. So the Special Operations Forces, I presume, are in charge of partisans and partisan activity. Now, this is why I was kind of referencing, I don't know whether these are special operations personnel, because actually you could quite conceivably get these sort of personnel behind enemy lines and operating in, if this is like the Kherson area that's kind of indicated by the map there that keeps flashing up. This could be Zaporizhia, Kherson. You could certainly imagine special forces operating there because it's Ukrainian land. You could easily hide yourselves. You're going to have partisan support from locals, but you have to be very careful because there will be collaborators as well. Or this could just be like local partisans doing this too. So I'm just unsure. But either it's special forces and or partisans, and there seems to be lots of partisan activity. This is a full kind of 2-minute video of just an absolute ton of stuff getting blown up, many of which I've reported previously. Derailed trains, explosions going off here, explosions going off there. What the partisans also do a lot of is spotting for, or spotting is probably the wrong word, revealing locations of sensitive equipment, so that like a HIMARS or a medium range or a long range drone or missile can hit whatever it is. Quite often you see them indicating, I think as you can see there, where he was putting the middle finger up, indicating where air defense batteries are stationed. That's really, really important. This has been happening since the beginning of the war, mind, but it's a very important, I think, component of what the partisans do. And I think the BBC had they had, I can't remember which one it was, what it was called. It was a one. I can remember it. I can see it now. It's not the enemy in the woods one set up in Kupiansk. It's the one that was following a mortar crew, I think, and then some other stuff as well. It was a BBC documentary. Anyway, detailed how partisans could get hold of like a call center. That I think it might be not the Comeback Alive. It's the call center that's also in charge of surrendering Russians, possibly as well, but I might be misremembering that. But they detailed how partisans would call and give locations of equipment. It's just a super important thing that happens that kind of we forget about, take for granted. But Ukrainians really need as much help from behind enemy lines as they can get. Now, even deeper behind enemy lines, all the way to Moscow, we have a car bomb that reportedly exploded there, and this was aiming to take out, it seems, a doctor of physical and mathematical sciences, an employee of the Stelmach Polyus Research Institute that specializes in laser technology. At least the car belonged to him. I presume he was a target. Apparently, the car was empty. So I don't know whether this was kind of a warning shot. More likely, the bomb went off, if it was indeed a bomb, before it was supposed to. It's reported the car belonged to that scientist. Unoccupied at the time. So that has happened in Moscow. And then I'm just going to refer you back to one of the two tankers that was attacked the other day in the Black Sea near Turkey. This is an event, or these two events. There's lots of footage now emerging from on top of the ships, also from the people getting off the ships, being evacuated and sailing away from the ships. So lots of quite interesting footage. Another video filmed on board one of the shadow tankers hit by Ukraine has been published. This is from the Kairos stranded in the Black Sea off the coast of Turkey. The sailors had moved safely out of the way of the fire, and then off the boat. There was quite a funny picture that someone had taken. It might even be that one. I think if you can see that white at the bottom there, I think it says in really big red writing, yeah, health and safety, no smoking. And of course, the whole thing is smoking. But anyway, the reason I brought that up again is because Chris Owicki has another thread on Russian war bloggers concluding gloomily and angrily that the Russian Black Sea Fleet is so weakened and so far behind technologically that it cannot retaliate effectively against Ukraine's attack on two Russian Shadow Fleet tankers. So this whole event, or these two events, have been met with quite a lot of anger from these Russian ultranationalist military bloggers. On November the 28th, the tankers Kairos and Virat were struck and seriously damaged by Ukrainian sea drones in the southern Black Sea. Both ships were disabled and had to be towed to Turkish ports. Ukraine subsequently declared a de facto blockade of Russian maritime cargo traffic. The news has been greeted by Russian war bloggers with resignation and complaints about the deficiencies of the Black Sea Fleet. Informant writes, quote, responses to such attacks are purely political, as they involve the destruction of ships and bulk carriers heading to Odessa. Strikes against them would significantly exacerbate relations with a number of respected partners, including Turkey. As a reminder, Odessa shipping remains one of the main sources of income for the Ukrainian budget. The Black Sea Fleet is incapable of blockading the Ukrainian coast due to its weakness. More strikes against port infrastructure in the Odessa region, including the port of Izmail, are likely to be expected. DSHRG Rusich, another channel, complains, quote, will there be retaliatory action? We doubt there will be. The Black Sea Fleet is confined to distant bases. Our esteemed partners, including Turkey, may not understand Russia's retaliatory actions should they ever decide to take them. Meanwhile, bulk carriers continue to sail to Odessa, and for some unknown reason, probably the same reason we don't attack the enemy's political leadership, we don't destroy them. Military informant concludes this is a logical consequence of the Russian Black Sea Fleet's withdrawal from its missions, hiding in ports from the enemy due to its inability to counteract Ukrainian unmanned boats. One can make endless threats about whether the grain carriers will reach the ports of Odessa, but in reality, tankers have yet to reach Novorossiysk. Where are Russia's own sea drones, the USVs, asks drone specialist UAV developer, who blames the Russian Navy's failure to develop to keep up with Ukrainian technology, quote. And I said that admirals just get off on getting effed. It's their BDSM. There's no other explanation for their total impotence for 4 years. We could blame it on the entire military, but no, FPV production has quickly been established and development is underway in Garand's Shaheds, in reconnaissance and in evading anti-aircraft drones. Even, God forbid me, communications are developing little by little. And then the Navy comes into the picture and eclipses all of the achievements of all branches of the armed forces with its brilliance. This is despite the fact that Russia has like 5 good USV projects for 2 years now. They could have launched them 2 years ago and outnumbered the Ukrainians like what happened in the FPV world. But no, we want a bigger, blacker torpedo. And yes, all the tankers and bulk carriers bound for Odessa will arrive there intact. You'll see. The worst part is we already knew yesterday afternoon that their reinforcements were heading to Novorossiysk. They knew, they saw, but they couldn't do anything about it. How much longer can this go on? How much longer are they going to screw us? Okay, so that's a response from some of the Russian mill bloggers. It's worth pointing out, and I kind of discussed this previously, that it's a high-risk strategy to start hitting vessels and entities that are third-party owned. Now, I said that if those 2 ships that were hit by USVs the other day were part of the Russian Black Sea Fleet and they were effectively owned by the Russians, then that is definitely a case of legitimate targeting. But if the Russians start hitting grain carriers that are owned by, say, I don't know, the British, French, I don't know, whoever it is, owning these grain carriers that then are, trying to, using the grain corridor, move food out to other nations around the world, then that is an attack on the nations receiving that food. It's an attack on the global food market, and it's an attack on the nations that own those vessels. So for the Russians to target the vessels using Odessa, that is a different kettle of fish than the Ukrainians targeting the vessels using Novorossiysk, because they essentially the vessels, the ghost ships, the Shadow Fleet, these are Russian owned vessels that are directly supporting Russia's war efforts, much more overtly. So while some of the mill bloggers complain that the ships won't get struck going into Odessa, it's probably some good rationale for them not being struck by the Russians. But I could also imagine that they will be throwing some missiles into Odessa, taking out the port infrastructure, if not the ship. So you may see them get a bit ballsy and try and take out those ships. You're more likely to see them take out the infrastructure that loads those ships. That's what I would do if I was the Russians. Just absolutely blitz Odessa, Ishmael, Chornomorska, and Reni, and so on and so forth, which, to be fair, they've been doing anyway, the Russians. Also, it's worth noting this. So according to live maps from web portal Marine Traffic, not a single oil tanker is currently docked in the most important Russian port of Novorossiysk. A few tankers are cruising outside the port, but refrain from getting any closer for now. Ukraine has currently imposed 100% sanctions on Russia's most important sea terminal in southern Russia. That is really, really significant. So the Ukrainians might well have had some great success in striking those 2 tankers, even though it could be seen as somewhat controversial. Ukrainian air defense last night, so moving on to the next section, shot down or jammed 63 out of the 89 Russian drones that were sent, mostly Shaheds, launched from a number of different places. 63 out of 89, I guess, isn't the best interception rate, but a lower number of drones means that, if you don't have a worse interception rate percentage, then it's not as bad. Although that is still 26 drones getting through, and that is a lot of drones. Okay, don't have a huge amount of detail. Although Anton Gerashenko has a thread that we're going to dip into concerning the damage done last night. Ukrainian Air Defense Forces, according to NOAA reports, I presume this is coming from the General Staff, destroyed 9,707 aerial targets in November. And among them, 11 Kinzhal missiles. So just in the month of November that's just finished, 11 Kinzhal missiles were destroyed, 51 KH-101 cruise missiles, 15 Iskander-M ballistic missiles, so all the KN-23, 20 Caliber cruise missiles, and nearly 3,000 Shaheds. 3,000 Shaheds in 1 month. destroyed. Ukrainian aviation also took out around 400 air targets and more. So I presume within that, those numbers that you just read, 400 of which were taken out by Ukrainian aviation, i.e. planes and helicopters. Now, these numbers are massive, and although those numbers look impressive, remember there are all the ones they haven't shot down, and Ukraine has had to deal with them, obviously taking out critical infrastructure, energy infrastructure, critical military infrastructure, aiming at air bases and military industrial complexes and so on and so forth. Like, Ukraine is under immense pressure every single night, and the question is that sustainable? How much pressure are these consistent strikes putting Ukraine under in terms of actually going to negotiations and saying, well, we put on a brave face, but actually we're really, really struggling and we do really want peace now. And as a result of being fairly desperate because of these strikes, we're going to accept things that we otherwise wouldn't accept. Is that the case? I'm simply asking the question here. Is that the case for Ukraine? Or, are as damaging as these strikes are, is Ukraine able to withstand them? Can they get through the winter period and scale up the production of their own missiles and drones to the point where they put Russia under that kind of pressure? So that's where we're at the moment. And of course, we've got the negotiations taking place now, but the US is seemingly putting an awful lot of pressure on Ukraine without putting any pressure on Russia. I'll do a separate video on the peace negotiations later. Now, we have got good news from the Ukrainians that they are utilizing different interceptors that are having more and more success. Here we see 2 interceptors apparently taking out jet-powered Shahed drones. These are quick-moving bad boys, but they are taken out by Wild Hornet's Sting drones. And these are being produced, I think, on a fairly decent scale. And if these Stings can take out jet-powered drones, again, coming from behind, I said this yesterday, it means that these Sting drones have got some serious speed, serious capabilities. Obviously, they won't be able to sustain that kind of speed for as long as a Shaheds are much smaller drones. But it appears that 2 of these Stings took out 2 jet-powered Shaheds, and that is an important point for the Ukrainians, where they can adapt to the threats that the Russians are throwing at them. Now, here is a video from Novorossiysk from, I don't know, it came out last night, but I don't know if it was from last night or previously. It's a caliber that was fired straight from a pier at Novorossiysk. So interesting, they got launchers right on the port's edge there. And it either detonates or gets taken down by their own air defense seconds after launch. The carrier reportedly doesn't even leave the port. I guess it could be sent from a ship. I don't know. But anyway, it just as soon as it gets sent, it gets blown up. So was it taken out by nearby trigger-happy air defense, or was it an exploding caliber missile? Anyway, that happened in Novorossiysk. Anton Gerashchenko talks us through the destruction from Russia's attacks overnight. Russia attacked Mykolaiv, Chernihiv, and Kherson regions, injuring people. Even on the days that Russia doesn't launch massive attacks on Ukraine, it still continues attacking on a smaller scale, injuring and killing people, destroying homes and infrastructure, inflicting daily terror. That takes place particularly around, say, Nikopol, Marhanets, well, anywhere along the front line, really. Chernihiv region, Russian forces struck an energy facility, injuring 2 women, a 38-year-old woman in the Desna settlement, Hormada, also sustained shrapnel wounds after a Russian drone completely destroyed a house and 2 cars. Mykolaiv, Russia launched Shaheds at the city. Kherson, Russian an attack injured 12 people, including a child. Russian forces targeted critical and social infrastructure, as well as the residential areas across the region. 12 apartment buildings and 20 private houses were damaged, along with a cell tower, an outbuilding, gas pipeline, a trolley bus, private garages, a bus, and several cars. In the morning, Russians struck Chornobaivka in the Kherson region. The attack damaged residential homes and fires broke out. 2 people were injured. Power outages were recorded in Kharkiv, Dnipro, and Kherson regions. And we're going to go on to Dnipro in a second. In fact, Yeah. So first of all, Ukrainians endure daily attacks from Russia. Russia is a terrorist state and war criminal to boot, says Anton Gerashenko with reference to this video. And I think that's a sort of video we need to remind ourselves of. Children and animals sheltering in a basement in a residential area that is getting absolutely shellacked by the Russians. It's disgusting. That's the Russians' sense of liberation. It's horrible. Bastards. So then, as if that wasn't bad enough, we have Dnipro this morning. At least 4 people have been killed as a ballistic missile just slams into Dnipro, and you can see it's caught on video there. That almost vertical terminal phase of the missile makes it so difficult to do anything about. This is why ballistic missiles are very difficult to shoot down. It's just the sheer speed of these things as they plummet to the ground at a near vertical trajectory. Just horrendous. Russian ballistic missiles struck Dnipro. As of now, well, actually, we know 4 people killed, 8 more injured, number likely to grow. Every day, Russia brings grief and destruction to Ukraine, again, says Anton Gerashenko. Dnipro 4 killed, 22 wounded is the claim there. And let's look near where they hit or where that missile hit. Oh, looks like in the middle of the city. Is that residential or industrial or no commercial office? I don't know. Looks a bit residential to me. Horrific stuff there from the Russians. And then just to go back to what I reported yesterday morning, there was an area of Kiev Oblast, the Kiev region, called Vishorod that was struck, and it was a residential building, and a few people were killed there. And that was one of the main outcomes of Russia's horrors the night before. I don't know whether this was a purposeful attack here. Russians killed an employee of Firepoint, a manufacturer of drones and Flamingo missiles, during an attack on Vishorod in the Kiev region. His family is in serious condition in the hospital. So is that just a sheer coincidence, or did they strike at that residential building as a targeted attack on that employee? Now, as far as what Ukraine did last night, Taganrog, moment of a long Neptune missile flyover, impact on recent missile strike was caught on camera. So you can see there, long Neptune being used, another Ukrainian missile attack on Taganrog there, which is in the Rostov region. Then we had a lot of people talking about this. This is Dagestan, the Republic of Dagestan. In Kaspiysk, a powerful explosion hit the city this morning, damaging homes and at least 15 cars. Local reports suggest a Ukrainian drone strike targeting the Dagestan naval weapons plant. Indeed, Max 25 says Kaspiysk either the likely targets of the drone were the Caspian Precision Mechanics plant or Dagestan. The main activities include the production of naval and underwater weapons for the Russian Navy. So that's Dagestan being targeted by the Ukrainian drones, I presume. There it could be a very long distance missile. I don't know. But anyway, something has exploded in Dagestan. We don't normally hear too much about Dagestan. And that's the end of that section. Now, I want to just almost go back to the hits and losses section and highlight a video that Andrew Perpetua did last night. And he doesn't do these lives very often anymore, but he said he just had a spare bit of time and he thought he'd talk about the trends. Go and watch Andrew Perpetua. Look for him on YouTube, find his channel, listen to the trend video. It was really interesting. So Andrew Perpetua and his team, they watch phenomenal amounts. He watches himself as a single human being, probably more videos on things getting blown up and destroyed and killed in the Ukrainian war than any other human being. So he watches all of these videos, and he has done over the course of the war. So he, more than anyone, is going to understand how and when things change and these different trends with regard to particularly drone activity and drone pilots. He had a couple of really interesting observations. He said the quality of drone pilots has plummeted for both sides. So he said it used to be that the Ukrainians were better drone pilots than the Russians. Now there are some really good Ukrainian drone pilots who are better than the Russians. But essentially, the average drone video he's looking at has things getting attacked. In fact, there's a really good possible example of this morning that might. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm no expert on where you should blow up a bridge laying piece of equipment, but we do have a let's look for it. I'm sure it is fairly close. We do have a bridge laying piece of equipment that was attacked by a Ukrainian drone, and it the first drone just hits the back of the vehicle in a way that you're thinking, well, that's a pretty solid piece of kit. It's a bridge laying armored engineering vehicle, and just wanging your drone into the back of it at some of the metal of that bridge layer is probably not the best use of a drone. The second drone goes and hits it on the side at an area that looks a little bit more sensible to hit, but essentially that doesn't. I'm not sure that hits exactly where it wants to. It looks like it hit just above it. Desperately trying to find this video, but I think that could go towards what Andrew Perpetua was talking about with regard to the pilots not being as good as they used to be. So let me just find that. So here's a video. The first drone just wangs itself into the back of that. So that's a bridge laying vehicle. And you're thinking, that's a massive amount of metal that it's just smacking into the back of. And I'm not sure these smaller sort of RPG, maybe even smaller munitions are going to do all that much damage to it. What you want to do is stop this thing from kind of moving. And then the second drone is a little bit more thoughtful and says, right, we've got some kind of vent going on here. That looks like a weakness. That's what we're going to hit. But then it just hits above it as it flies in right at the end there. It seems to then just go above it, but that could be a better choice. So anyway, he said, from surveying all these thousands of videos, he's like, they are not as good pilots as they used to be. They used to like hover by the side of a vehicle and then try and hit, say with a truck. He says with trucks, we keep seeing them hit the back of trucks that are driving along, and then from 200 meters off, the drone pilot is just aimed in for the back of the truck. He's like, right, I'm going to hit the back of the truck. Bosh, and does so. But actually, all that does is put a hole in the back of the flatbed or whatever it is, rather than you used to see these drones go alongside the trucks and then hit the fuel tank on the side, relatively close to the cabin, and then that will blow up the fuel tank, and then blow up the whole truck, and that's a much better tactic. And he said that just they aren't as good, but the reason why they probably aren't as good anymore is because they've expanded drone pilots recruitment so massively. Both sides have done this, and as you do that, and he said we did see this at some point earlier in the war where they expanded drone pilots and drone unit numbers, and so you had a dip and then it's kind of normalized again. But he said this is a massive dip. Like the skill level of the pilots is not nearly as good on average as it used to be. And then he says that's a bit of a problem. But he also said what they're aiming at has really changed for both sides. So it used to be that the Russians used to predominantly aim at dugouts and fortifications and positions with their drones. And there was at the beginning of the war, or when the drones were becoming much more prevalent, and I showed you loads of graphs of this Tochny and Kampada load. The Russians were taking out positions first, and then vehicles, and then personnel. And the Ukrainians were much bigger on sort of vehicles than personnel, and not positions. Positions are still being hit, but for both sides now, that's bottom. And for the Ukrainians, personnel are the number one things they hit. not so much vehicles, but he said not because they're not aiming for vehicles, it's because there just aren't any vehicles as well. So there's a bit of a confounding variable there. So the Russians just aren't using so many vehicles. And as soon as they do use a vehicle, then they just get swarmed on by all these drones. But essentially, drones are going for personnel. He says with the Russians, they're aiming for a lot of vehicles. So Ukrainians are still using the same amount of vehicles. And this is exactly what I've been saying by looking at stats, by the way, that Ukrainians are still being provided enough infantry mobility vehicles and MRAPs and whatnot from their own production, as well as predominantly from allies. So the Russians are still going for them big time, and then troops as well. So what this then looks like is, it looks like the Ukrainians are losing many more vehicles, and they are losing more vehicles, but they're losing more vehicles because they use more vehicles, and the Russians are using fewer vehicles, and they're getting their troops hit individually by these drones. And so that was an interesting shift in what they're targeting that aligns perfectly with what I've been saying from and analyzing the figures and how. But he says that both sides are losing. He's another thing. Both sides are losing a lot of unarmored vehicles. The Ukrainians are using an absolute ton of SUVs, like NATO trucks and car for Ukraine. We're fundraising to provide a lot of these vehicles because they absolutely get shellacked. I spoke to James from Why Ukraine, who's fighting now for the Azov International Battalion. He's a drone engineer with them. And he says that they get through these trucks really quickly because not only they're attacked by the Russians, but also you're driving 100 miles an hour down potholed roads and you're knackering the trucks pretty quickly. And he says, and it is 100 miles an hour. I mean, literally, absolutely bombing down these roads. So these trucks are getting knackered, but they're getting targeted massively by the Russians and by the Ukrainians as well. On the Russian side, he says the Russians are using more SUVs than they used to. It used to be full on Bukankas the whole time, but they probably, chomped through a whole load of Bukanka Scooby-Doo vans. And he said that the Ukrainians are now using Bukanka vans. That you didn't see that earlier in the war, but it could be they got to the point where they're having to use as all sorts of different vehicles as well. So a really good analysis from Andrew Perpetua. He knows what he's talking about when it comes to surveying these videos and looking at trends. Okay. Moving to other bits and pieces. Russia has described the impending WhatsApp ban as import substitution. The app will be replaced by none other than the domestic messenger Max, better known as a pocket checklist. Roskomnadzor previously threatened to fully block WhatsApp for allegedly failing to comply with Russian law and aiding fraudsters. The agency added the restrictions have been introduced gradually as a warning to the extremists who own the platform. This is the Russians getting a much tighter grip on information in Russia, so stopping Russians from spreading truthful information, one might add, and also sharing it with the outside world. They're making more and more of an intranet or like a closed off net for themselves, web for themselves, rather than an internet that connects them to the outside world. This is to just control their population and keep them compliant. Here's another example of it where they're replacing WhatsApp now, even more evidently replacing it with their own Max app. That is an app that just effectively keeps an eye on your phone. So all new phones in Russia are now bought with the Max app preloaded on it, and it effectively allows the FSB to keep an eye on everything you're saying and doing. So the Russians are really, really strangling freedoms in Russia. Now, the Danish armed forces have 122 photos of 6 Russian ships in the area of the blown up Nord Stream gas pipeline 4 days before the explosion. One of the ships, the SS 750, had a mini submarine on board, according to the FAS. Now, this is in light of a Ukrainian being extradited from Italy to Germany to face trial for the destruction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, or at least to face investigations, and Poland refusing to extradite the Ukrainian they have there. And now we have evidence that goes in completely the other direction to say, well, maybe it wasn't the Ukrainians, it was the Russians what did it. Danish armed forces have all these photographs that really implicate the Russians in the destruction of the Nord Stream 2. So who knows? On November the 30th, so yesterday, airspace over Vilnius airspace. So again, the Baltic nations really suffering. Here we are seeing the Baltics received all sorts of balloons from Belarus with contraband, it seems on. It seems they have on board, and it's their way of smuggling. Vilnius airport had to be closed for about 8 hours due to 60 hot air balloons flying into Lithuania from Belarus. They were launched every 30 minutes to maximize disruption. So is this a case of smuggling, or is this now a case of closing down airports and screwing over the Baltics? Over 7,400 passengers and 50 flights were affected by the incident. Earlier, Lithuanian airports had asked the Prosecutor General's office to start a pre-trial investigation. The Lithuanian Union of Occupational Safety and Health states that the flights of the balloons that disrupt air traffic and create hazards should be considered assistance to a foreign state in its actions against Lithuania. Russia and Belarus keep up with the hybrid attacks on Europe, says Gerashenko. And then we hear that NATO may get, quote, more aggressive in countering Russian hybrid attacks, a top military official says, which is nice 4 years into a war. Admiral Giuseppe Cavadragoni, who chairs NATO's military committee, told the Financial Times that the alliance is reassessing how it confronts hybrid threats that have intensified across Europe. I mean, as someone says, it's hard to be less aggressive. This is long overdue. But yeah, there you go. Right, let's check to see if there's anything that's emerged. Yeah, mainly stuff to do with peace negotiations. So that's enough from me today. Thank you very much for watching. Really appreciate your viewership. If you have the wherewithal, please pop along to atpgeo.com/donate. That will take you to our latest fundraiser, which is with Jiggers Paul and Jonathan Fink from Silicon Curtain. We are doing a joint fundraiser. That's for a quad for the 80th Air Assault Brigade. Together, we're doing that with Toonie Tuesday, I think, as well. That's raised 10,000. So I think it's going into a larger fundraiser. So thank you for any help with that. I'm possibly going to do a live stream with Jonathan Fink later tonight, but not 100% sure about that. But anyway, please pop along to atpgeo.com/donate. In the meantime, take care. Speak soon.